On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we preview a battle of the Blue Bloods and a 2022 national title rematch, Kansas and North Carolina.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Eric Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching all the shows free and available here with LOJ, anywhere you get your podcasts, and on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the show. On today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're giving you the preview of the Kansas-North Carolina Top 10 Showdown, Battle of the Blue Bloods, home and home start with Carolina, 2022 national title rematch, 2008 Final Four rematch, I guess 2012 Elite Eight rematch, all of those under Bill Self here, and plenty more in the Roy Williams Bowl. So we'll get into that. Headlines, UNC scouting report, matchups of the game, plenty more coming at you on this episode of the show. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can get in on the game, and you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So Kansas takes on North Carolina. It's a Friday night game, which, not a super usual occurrence necessarily in college basketball for KU. So I think makes it a little interesting because you lead into the weekend, you get a little college basketball, you get a little college football. We'll have our Iowa State preview later this week. And then, on with the weekend that you certainly go. So as far as the headlines coming into this one, it is obviously a rematch of the 2022 national title game. And I think it's prevalent because in theory, Kansas ranked number 1 in the AP preseason poll. North Carolina ranked number 9. Now, both of them are a little bit lower than that. If I look on like KenPom, where, for instance, Kansas is ranked 7th and North Carolina is ranked 17th. But still, you probably view both of these teams as, I guess you would say, national title contenders for this season. And so you have a national title rematch where two teams are vying for a national title this year, and it does become the Roy Williams Bowl, who, by the way, won't be there at the game. I think there was a comment that he was like, I was never going to go and show up at Allen Fieldhouse and then be cheering when the other team made a bucket, right? So you get that. And obviously there, aren't – there's so many different players from when things were 2 years ago, but it's the same head coaches. And there are still the same lead guards for both teams. RJ Davis was part of that title team, was a starter. Dajuan Harris was part of the title team for KU. He was a starter. So KJ Adams is on the floor at the end of the game. You do have at least a little bit of returning status from that one. And speaking of RJ Davis, that's another headline in this one. This is a battle of Wooden Award candidates, two of the favorites to be Wooden Award candidates and to be All-Americans, Hunter Dickinson and RJ Davis. Now, they play very different positions, but there will be some interaction, right? Hunter Dickinson trying to defend ball screens of RJ Davis, or when RJ Davis drives into Hunter Dickinson, right? That'll probably be the main times that they're going at each other. If RJ Davis ends up on Hunter Dickinson on the defensive end, that's probably a good thing for KU that they need to exploit in the post. And then the final big headline here is trying to prove your ranking. For North Carolina, you had kind of a sluggish first, 35 minutes or so of your opener against Elon. Well, everybody forgets about that if you go on the road and you win in Allen Fieldhouse and you win in Lawrence and you score that huge win early in the season. Everybody's going to be talking about, okay, North Carolina should be a top 5 team. They're a true title contender, right? Whereas with Kansas, if you win this game, you feel like you solidify your number 1 ranking a little bit more, especially after, even though it didn't count and you had a lot of players injured, right? You lose the Arkansas exhibition game. Maybe some people start to question things a little bit. Well, you go out and beat North Carolina, a top 10 opponent. Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, yeah, like this is what they are when they're healthy. Like they're going to be just fine. This is a very good basketball team. So those are top headlines. Now for the North Carolina scouting report, they come in on the season 1-0 with that victory over Elon. A game that they were down with, just under 7 minutes to go, but they ended up winning by double digits in the end. Elon, not really, at least expected to be a very good team. If you're looking at like KenPom, for instance, they came into the game ranked in like the 290s. They've since moved up because of the performance, but this is a team last year for North Carolina that finished top 15 in the country on KenPom in offensive and defensive adjusted efficiency. So this was a really balanced team a season ago, and they did a great job maximizing possessions. They had low turnover numbers. They had a great rebounding team, and they walled off the interior defensively. They didn't let you get easy shots at the rim. And then you add to it that they shot well and they got to the free throw line a bunch. There's a reason why they were a 1 seed, that if not for a red hot Alabama team, who knows, maybe even ends up going all the way to the Final Four, if not further, right? But right now for this season, Ken Pom has them as basically a top 15 offense, defense just outside the top 30. And in that opening game against Elon, North Carolina shot 13 of 32 from three. That's 40%. So they looked really good from three in that game, but they also shot under 40% on 2-point shots. So that becomes interesting because now you're going to be playing a bigger team if you're North Carolina. Kansas, obviously bigger, more athletic than Elon, and you didn't have a good 2-point shooting game. Was that just, lid on the basket, weird game early in the season, or is that going to be indicative that Carolina doesn't have a bunch of players who are great at driving or getting easy buckets? I don't know. That remains to be seen. But they did maximize their possessions like they did last year in their first game. They had just 6 turnovers. They had 18 offensive rebounds. It's a 38% offensive rebound rate. But again, oddly, they found themselves losing 71-69. So they maximized the possessions. They shot 40% from three, but they were down 71-69 with under 7 minutes to go to a team barely ranked inside the top 300. So I think tough to feel great about that first performance if you're UNC against Elon. And if that's how they play in this one against Kansas, probably not going to go well for them. But again, if it was just kind of a bad, weird game start of the season, then maybe they'll just be fine. Now, as far as the personnel that they have, RJ Davis is back. He is a National Player of the Year candidate, as we discussed earlier. He went for 24 points in that opener. He averaged 21.2 points per game last year on 40% from three. It'll be interesting if Kansas throws Rylan Griffin on him at all, because last year in the Sweet 16 when Alabama beat North Carolina, Griffin drew RJ Davis a lot on the defensive end of the floor, and he really held RJ Davis in check. Now, I guess you could say, like, what do you mean holding him in check? Because, like, was it just RJ Davis was missing shots and it was fine defense, or was it all Rylan Griffin defensively? That'll be kind of interesting in how that goes about. Other notables returning include Elliott Cadeau. He's a former 5-star, reclassed last year, had a good freshman year. The question coming into this year, though, for Cadeau, a good passer and point guard type, was how good of a 3-point shooter could he be? Because you didn't really see it much his freshman year. Well, he went 3 of 4 from three in the opener. He had 17 and 8. So if he's a much improved 3-point shooter, I think that was a question for me looking at this roster on paper. I knew they had RJ Davis who'd shoot well from three, and they added Cade Tyson. We'll get into some of their additions, who's an elite shooting transfer. But I wondered how many options they'd have from three. Well, if Cadeau's shooting better from three, that helps answer it and is why you shoot 40% in the opener. Jalen Withers, he is also a year 2 transfer for them in the program after coming over from Louisville. He's kind of an athletic 6'9" forward who can play the 4-5 for them. He had a 10-10 game in the opener. Jalen Washington, he is a 6'10" junior center, 7'4" wingspan. He's kind of played sparingly in the past. You had Armando Bacot, but that was a big question for Carolina coming into the year as well. Who would be the big man? Bacot graduates. Do they have enough depth there? Do they have the dudes? I kind of just sat under the idea that, like, I feel like Carolina always finds a good big man. But he only had 8 and 4 in the opener, and maybe there's still questions there about what you're getting from the center position if you're Carolina. And then Seth Trimble, who had 31 points in a scrimmage game earlier. He's always been a good defender, but now he's flashing on offense, 3 of 4 from three, 15 points in the opener. So it's a really good backcourt for Carolina. Again, they lost Bacot. They also lost Harrison Ingram, which KU should have found a way to bring him on. He was awesome last year. They lost a couple bench pieces. So, yeah, the questions are just, what is the shooting going to be? Obviously, they checked that off in game 1 that they look good. What's the center play going to be? Are they still going to be elite rebounding without Armando Bacot? But obviously, it helped adding Cade Tyson, elite wing shooter from Belmont, Van Allen Lubin, who is kind of a shooting 4-man. And then they added 2 top 15 recruits, Ian Jackson, who's kind of a 2-way 6'5" point guard, Drake Powell, athletic 6'6" wing. None of those started in the opener. None of them had really big games, but given the profile of what Cade Tyson is, I think we can all fully expect him to come into Allen Fieldhouse and go 4 for 4 from three. But anyway, yeah, I think North Carolina can have a real argument for the best backcourt in the country. I mean, you can argue RJ Davis is the best player in the country. You could argue he's the best guard in the country, so that's a good place to start. But the fact that you have Cadeau, who continues to improve and was already a good player, Seth Trimble showing up, you got some young freshmen with talent behind them. you could make the real argument this is the best backcourt in the country. And if it's not, it's certainly up there and in the conversation. And you compare, for instance, Arkansas, who you played in the exhibition game, that gave you a lot of trouble, and they had a really good backcourt. I think Arkansas is going to end up with one of the best backcourts in the country as well, and that gave you a ton of trouble. So what does it look like in this game? Overall, I think this is still, even though they had the weird game in the opener with Elon, I think this is still going to be a really good team that is capable of making a Final Four run, is capable of winning a title, has some star power, has a candidate for best player in the country, but showed some flaws early that maybe you're getting them at the right time of the season as they try to mesh with their new team. So for KU, you got to hold serve at Allen Fieldhouse, prove that you can beat the best. Obviously, you did this last year in the non-con too. So it doesn't guarantee that you're going to have this elite season. But this is a new year. Show who you are. Show that you can beat a team with an elite guard and with elite guard play, because a lot of times in March, that's what it takes to get by and to win. Let's continue on our matchups of the game. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood Gold. You don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1% with Robinhood Gold, which allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. This episode is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. We'll do pick a prop later in the show because props are already up for this game. It's such a big game that they already have the spread up. You can get KU minus 7.5, over-unders 154.5. And you can get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to the Everydayers tuning in to each and every show. You can check out Locked on College Basketball for your second listen every day. All right, matchups of the game between Kansas and North Carolina. We're going to go two matchups and then a player matchup here. Number one is Kansas defending RJ Davis and Elliott Cadeau, specifically on ball screens. So you look at what North Carolina did in the opener. Of the 32 three-pointers that they took 23 of those 32 from above the break. So that's a lot of threes taken above the break. And when you look at last season, that kind of adds up to what they've been. They took 3 times the amount of above the break threes as they had corner threes a season ago. So that's just kind of part of their offense. But I think a big reason why, okay, if you think about it, if you're running a pick and roll and the point guard, the guard's going to fire a three because you go under the screen or he gets around the screen too fast that he's able to get the shot off, that never happens in the corner. You don't set up pick and roll really very often for the guy in the corner working because the sideline is there and then it adds an extra defender, right? So you look at that becomes important. And then if you do let them go off a screen and drive into the lane, and then you have help defense come in and cover them in the lane, they can kick it to the corner where they went 6 of 9 from 3 in the corners against Elon. So obviously very important to have good ball screen defense in this game. This was a huge struggle for KU last season long, especially by the time the season ended. It was a big issue for KU. Now you're going up against one of the best guard teams in the country. What can you do about it this year? Number 2, play clean basketball and avoid turnovers. It's obviously tough to do early in the year. I mentioned that as one of the matchups for last game, and they did a pretty good job against it. Different to do against Carolina, at least in theory, but this hasn't been a Carolina team that forces a ton of turnovers. So last season, North Carolina was 29-8. They had a 14.8 turnover rate, 14.8% turnover rate. That was outside of the top 300 nationally. So this was not a North Carolina team that forced a lot of turnovers. But in games where UNC did force a turnover rate of 14% or higher, which again, that's kind of a low bar, they went 18-2. So basically, like, as long as they were, even if they were bad at forcing turnovers, but they weren't like the worst in the country, they did so many other things well. But when their defensive turnover rate was just like not forcing turnovers at all, when it was below 14%, they went 11-6. 18-2, 11-6. There is a sizable difference in that win-loss record there. So for KU, you're not getting a ton of pressure from Carolina, and I think that's part of it. It's almost like North Carolina is not a team who's going to press you and create a bunch of ball pressure that's going to cause these turnovers to necessarily happen. So if you're having turnovers, it probably means you had self-inflicted wounds if you're the team that did that against Carolina in a lot of ways, right? Sometimes they can just have a good game stealing the ball or whatever, but in a lot of ways it can be self-inflicted. And so that means for you to have a good turnover game against Carolina, you just need to do your thing. Just don't have self-inflicted bad passes. And so you have a veteran point guard in Dajuan Harris. Just don't have the unforced ones, because this on paper should not be a strength for Carolina if you're basing it on last year. And so don't turn something that was a weakness last year all of a sudden into a strength because you just are making, dumb mistakes. Player matchup here, I feel like it's pretty obvious. RJ Davis versus Dajuan Harris. Now, I'm not entirely sure this will be the defensive matchup, to be clear, because technically Elliott Cadeau handles a majority of the point guard duties. Like, Davis will still bring it up. Davis will still, be a point guard at certain times. But I guess if you were technically saying who's like, if you have to pick one guy that's the point guard and one guy that's the shooting guard, I guess you would say Cadeau, even though, again, Davis does handle some point guard duties too. But that anyway means that we could see Dajuan Harris on Elliott Cadeau. We could see David Coit or Zeke Mayo or one of these other guys on RJ Davis. But I think therein lies the issue. Wouldn't you want your best defender in Dajuan Harris on their best offensive player in RJ Davis, as opposed to having David Coit or Zeke Mayo? And again, maybe it ends up being Ryland Griffin like it was in the Sweet 16. But then you start getting into a thing where it's like, okay, what are you going to do with these other players? And maybe it helps that they're starting a 3-guard lineup with Trimble in there along with Cadeau and Davis, that you could even say, hey, we're going to put Griffin on Davis. We're going to put Dajuan Harris on Cadeau, and then we're going to put, Diggy Coit on Seth Trimble or whatever. That could absolutely happen. There will be some possession, though, whether it's a switch onto or whether it's that time of the game where Dajuan is guarding RJ Davis. I feel good about that, even if it's not for the majority of the game. Now, you can't just shut down RJ Davis. He's still going to produce. But what do you do with star players? You can make them more efficient. You can make them work harder for the points they're going to put up, right? Make him shoot 20 times to get his 20 points. Can you force more pressure and create some turnovers on it, more than the 6 that North Carolina had in the open? And then on offense, this would be a huge game for Dajuan to maybe hit a couple threes, to finish at the rim, to be super efficient as a passer and a facilitator. And if Dajuan does have a good game, I think KU wins this game. If he's just okay, I think it's going to be tough to compete, because you look at this, if you're saying they have one of the best backcourts, if not the best in the country, your guards better be ready to play in this game. And we'll see if Dajuan can step up to the challenge along with the rest of the KU guards. All right, let's finish up. Players to watch, pick a prop. This is Locked On Jayhawks. We are brought to you on today's episode by Hims, which is changing the men's healthcare game by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits or the conversation we're having now. And one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. With hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, Hims can help you find the ED option that works for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That is HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compound products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Finishing things up on today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks, and we will have a KU Iowa State preview for you later this week. We'll have recaps of the Kansas North Carolina and Kansas Iowa State games in our postcasts, which will come after the game. So on Friday night for the North Carolina, on Saturday night, whenever I guess the Iowa State game ends up. All right, who are players to or Hawks to soar, I guess we should say. We just did our player matchup to watch, which was Dajuan and RJ Davis. So Hawks to soar. On offense, I'm going to go with Hunter Dickinson. So if you look at defensive BPR on Evan Miyakawa's website, evanmiya.com, Jalen Washington, their starting center, he was bottom half among North Carolina players last season in terms of defensive, kind of rating there. So far through one game this year, he is also in the bottom half. He's not like cratered at the bottom, but it's like, kind of middle bottom half. And I think beyond all that, it's not a ton of center depth for North Carolina. They don't have a luxury of a bunch of centers they can throw in there. So this could be one where if you get Jalen Washington into foul trouble, it could cause them a lot of trouble. And then maybe you even end up with, having seen some Withers as a small ball five, and then you can take advantage even more so of your height advantage that you have in this game. And I think Dickinson needs to dominate on the inside too for KU to win this game, especially because if you're looking at it, if North Carolina is going to have some advantages with putting him into pick and roll, get some of those advantages back by dominating on the inside. And I think he will. I think he's going to have a big double-double, 20 and 10. I think he was shaking some rust off on those inside shots in the first game. I think that will be shaken off a little bit more in this game. So give me Hunter Dickinson to have that double-double and have a big performance on the offensive end. Our defensive hawk to soar, Flory Badunga. I going back and rewatching that game, like his defense has been really good for KU in the early going. He is just flying around. He's making some big blocks. And I think he's going to have a big edge on North Carolina's backup center in this one. And I've been really impressed with how good he's been to start the year. So much so that I guess not even ruling out the fact that could he be a one and done at the end of the year, even playing backup minutes? I'm still leaning to the idea he's back for year two, but if this continues and he continues to produce at a very high level off the bench, I don't know. It gets tough in the NBA because he's only 6'8", 6'9". He doesn't really shoot the basketball, but the wingspan's there and yada, yada, yada. But I think Flory can have a big game. And when you think about, what if KU does have some trouble defending, ball screens and the guards getting switched on to big men in certain scenarios, does Bill Self throw Flory out there and all of a sudden he gets a couple big swap blocks on RJ Davis driving or Elliott Cadeau driving and it changes the game and Flory ends up playing, 16, 18 minutes and Hunter only plays 24 or something. I don't know. Honorable mention Shaquille Moore. If I knew he was healthy and going to be playing, I could see a defensive stretch where he comes in there and you need some good defensive guards because they have a lot of good offensive guards and he helps change the game for 5-10 minutes in the game. But I don't know for sure if he would be playing or not. So as far as the pick a prop right now, Kansas minus 7.5 on FanDuel. Over under is 154.5. Some numbers that I find interesting. So you can get Dajuan Harris to score 10 or more points at plus 114. I think that's a little bit interesting here. You can get to score 15 or more points, Zeke Mayo at plus 162. Find that interesting. And you can even get to score 20 points, Hunter Dickinson at plus 126. You can get RJ Davis at plus 126 as well. I said earlier, Hunter Dickinson could be a 20 and 10 type game. If you want to parlay that together, you can get that at plus 196. But let's go with I don't know. I think he gets the double-double. Let's go with a safer one. Let's say Hunter Dickinson, 10-plus rebounds, and Hunter Dickinson, 15-plus points. That's parlayed plus 106, so above even money. That'll be our pick prop for the game. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, back on Friday for a KU Iowa State preview, and then later Friday night for KU North Carolina recap. See you then.